Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Radine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Desatadine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare. Continuing with part 2 of Vibhisana, one of the very important personalities in Ramayana. Vibhisana was very dear to Lord Ramachandra. And that we heard in the first part, wonderful prayers by the Sri Vaishnava acharyas or alvars, glorifying Vibhisana in very glowing terms. Vibhisana being entrusted by Ram with Sri Ranganath, who existed in the Ikshvaku dynasty since the time of Lord Brahma, passing on to Ikshvaku into the Ayodhya kings. Ram gave the deity to Vibhisana to take with him to Ayodhya, to Lanka. The deity wanted to stay in Srirangam, so he looked in the direction of Vibhisana. How important is Vibhisana? And in the theme of the entire Ramayana on surrender, Vibhisana is the principal personality, one of the many, but principal personality. So we heard some of those descriptions of his surrender. Now we're going to hear something further about his service following that surrender, because surrender means service. There was a question from the class yesterday about Vibhisana. There was a question, was there some story about, I can't even remember exactly, 2 birds or something? Ram, 2 birds and a hunter. So was that something that Ram spoke to appease Sugriva? So here's what we found, the researchers. This is from Yuddha Kanda. To appease Sugriva, who was objecting to Vibhisana's request to join Ramchandra's retinue, Rama narrates an incident from the past about a dove that gave shelter to an eagle, even when the latter had killed the dove's wife. Eagle had killed the dove's wife, the dove gave shelter to an eagle. He then quotes the words of sage Kandu, a son of sage Kanva, who is known to have spoken on the virtue of giving shelter to anyone who supplicates oneself to a person who is capable of giving shelter. And he also quotes the demerit of not doing so. This is the topic that we were discussing previous class, was Ram's discussion with Sugriva, indicating Ram's compelling concern or decision to accept Vibhisana, whoever he is. And this is some of the content that helped convince Sugriva. But it's an indication for us about the interest of the personality of Godhead, however fallible and imperfect and whatever we may be, he's very kind. And he follows these principles as outlined here in this section. After surrendering came service. Ram wanted to hear the fortifications of Ravan and the Rakshasas and Lanka, and he heard all that. And then he wanted some suggestions from Vibhisana how to cross the ocean, and we briefly heard about that. The ancestry of Ram, King Sagara, how King Sagara had done some very significant service to help the ocean personified, and so the ocean personified would be disposed to help Ram, his descendant of Sagara. The only problem was the ocean personified didn't recognize Ram, and so Ram became displeased, transcendently angry, that the ocean personified was unprepared to render service, whoever he was. And so there's different versions of Ramayana, some simply with his glance, some with his arrows shot into the sea. The sea began to boil and the fish began to wail with difficulty from the burning of the ocean, boiling of the ocean. And so ocean personified came forward, offered prayers to Ram, and made his suggestion how to cross. So then began the process of building the bridge to reach Lanka. Vibhisana, this was so, the purpose of narrating this is Vibhisana's advice, Vibhisana's service to Ram. Another service happened when two of the favored spies, Shuka and Sara of Ravan, were sent, and they came in disguise as Vanaras, but immediately somehow Vibhisana detected them, and the two spies pictured here behind Vibhisana were brought before Ram, and Ram released them. They were going to be whooped by the Vanaras. But this is Ram's kindness as well as Vibhisana's service. Ram was understood the Dharma, which earlier Hanuman had indicated, that messengers are not to be killed. Vanaras are ready to finish them. But Ram instead not only didn't punish, but he sent them back, and that little with a message, tell Ravana he's got a big army over here waiting to come to Lanka, and best if he recognizes the strength of his foe. And the exchange was such that Shuka and Sarana became very much appreciative of the munificence of Lord Ramachandra. And that became a little bit of a problem later on between themselves and Ravana. But they're obedient to Ravana, at least for this stretch of time. The bridge is built. They cross the bridge together. They reach the vicinity of Lanka, and Vibhisana leads the way of how to situate themselves, and here's Lanka, and here's this and that. He's the guide, or the one who is giving suggestions in service to Lord Ramachandra. In fact, periodically Vibhisana would inform Ram in various ways about the prowess of the demons on Ravana's side. Now, this seems to be a very standard kind of procedure. Ravana wanted the same thing from Shuka and Sarana, standing on the ramparts or standing on the area just around gate. He wanted to know who's who and what's their strength and what's their history. Or all of that is part of a soldier's or a commander-in-chief's function, is to find out about the other side. And Vibhishan was more than ready to provide that kind of service to Ram. The next, there you see Lanka on the other side. There's, I guess, Rakshas of some kind, maybe it's Ravana, checking out what the Vanaras are up to. Now, some other service that Vibhishan rendered. Ram orders Nila, Angada, Hanuman, and others to storm the 4 gates. They're inside the area around the Lanka fort, and in the 4 directions. Ram stays on Suvela mountain with some portions of the army, and some portions of the army go streaming into the 4 gates, or to charge at the 4 gates. So we have this scene where the army of the Vanaras are surrounding Lanka on all sides. And the numbers are massive. We'll hear just in a moment. Ravana is perturbed. He didn't foresee anything like this. So he calls his spies, Shuka and Sarana. And Shuka and Sarana give the numbers of soldiers. And the numbers is off the chart. It gives some counting system of numbers in Vedic culture. And the numbers are immense. So many, many, many. And coming across the bridge are more and more and more soldiers. And they're praising the strength of the Vanara army. And Ravana doesn't like that. I mean, he wanted to hear what's going on, but he didn't want to hear what's going on. And so he severely chastised them and said, if you for your faithful service for so long, I'm not going to kill you, but otherwise, immediately praising the enemy this way, I would kill you. And their parting words were, may you be victorious. But then he calls another Shardula to hear their sense, go forth and spy. And they come back saying they were detected by Vibhishan, another service of Vibhishan. They were arrested, beaten within the edge of their life. Yet Ram set them free. This is the second time spies were treated with some dignity. Because after all, they're just servants, menial servants of another person. So they're not to be blamed, per se. The Ravana is the one. And they're just, unfortunately, in the service of the wrong person. So he speaks like that and says again, carry the message to Ravana. He's in for a big fight. Give back Sita and everything will be nice. And he also speaks of, when he reports to Ravan, the might of the Vanara army. And Ravana hears it. But he still is determined, as we heard before, he's completely determined for battle because he considers himself invincible. Now, the next service that we hear specifically from Vibhishan, along with fighting with different soldiers and so forth, comes Kadamba, Kumbhakarna, Kumbhakarna, after Indrajit's foray with the serpentine arrows doesn't work, it looks like Ram and Lakshman were dead, defeated, but they weren't. So now he wants to wake up Kumbhakarna. And we saw some of these slides before. Kumbhakarna's difficult to wake up. Finally, he wakes up, he eats a whole lot, drinks some blood, and now he's coming before Ravana, ready for service, as he said he would do. And he comes forth on this giant chariot. Remember, the place where he was resting was 8 miles long, so he's a giant. And in the course of his encountering different soldiers on the battlefield, one who he encounters because he's been told which one is Sugriva, he smashes Sugriva and knocks him unconscious. He places Sugriva under his arm and goes back into the city of Lanka with the idea that if Sugriva is defeated, then the army will lose their leader. And if the army loses their leader, they'll be weakened. So that's his idea. Sugriva has a different idea. And Sugriva comes to external consciousness and has inside the gates of Lanka has a big fight with Kumbhakarna. And the painting shows he's biting his nose and biting his ear and ripping off his ear and scratching his side and bounds into the air and goes back into the Vanara ranks. And Kumbhakarna is astonished because he's so powerful. And Sugriva is also very powerful. So Kumbhakarna goes back outside the gate, has more fighting, and giant. They're using boulders and trunks of trees, and he's got this giant club. And eventually, Ram kills Kumbhakarna. And when Ram kills Kumbhakarna, separating his limbs from the rest of his body, Ravana is filled with surprise and filled with lamentation. And this celebrated verse from Ramayana, since that venerable Vibhisana, my pious brother, was banished by me, this bitter fruit of that painful deed has come to me. So he's, it's karma. I mean, he's not using the word karma, but the fruit of that painful deed has come to me. Now there's many other sinful deeds, and the fruit of those sinful deeds come back to the performer. Down below are the list of kings that are killed, soldiers, generals, great leaders in the Vanara army. The Rakshasa army are killed by different members of the Vanara group. Lakshmana kills the son, another of the sons of Ravana. And the remaining son has a plan to gain some strength, some position. Indrajit, he has different mystic powers and from performance of yagyas and so forth. So Indrajit creates an illusory Sita. There's Ravana, and there's Indrajit, and there's so many soldiers, and there's the illusory Sita. And the illusory Sita is brought into the presence of Hanuman, and before Hanuman, he cuts off Sita's head. And Hanuman devastated, because remember, Hanuman met Sita, and he has the utmost regard for Sita as the dearmost of Ravana. He wonders when he meets Sita, how could Ram even live in the absence of this noble, illustrious consort and queen, Sita? So he has immense regard for her. And when he sees this illusory Sita killed, he's devastated. Vibhisana to the rescue, who informs Hanuman, no worry, this is a mystic illusory trick of Indrajit. He has lots of them. And gain heart. Sita has not been harmed, I assure you. Then another service of Vibhisana comes. Indrajit goes back to the performance of yagyas because he had this boon, you remember, from Lord Brahma, that when he completes this particular yagya, a celestial chariot will rise from the fire, and once he's on that celestial chariot, he can't be defeated by anyone. But if he doesn't complete his mantras, then he can be defeated. So Vibhisana knows Indrajit is in this secluded place doing a yagya. So Vibhisana took Lakshmana to that very place where Indrajit was performing the sacrifice, first of all, to stop the sacrifice. And it worked. We heard the whole description with Hanuman and Lakshmana, that big battle between the two armies, and eventually Lakshmana killed Indrajit. But he otherwise would have been invincible had he completed this yagya, according to the boon given by Lord Brahma. One other very important service comes when the battle with Ravana is taking place towards the very end. I mean, there's Vibhisana engages in fighting and so on, but a very significant service is he gives Ram the indication how Ravan can be killed, because so many attempts, cutting off his heads, cutting off his arms, shooting him here and there, nothing works. Vibhisana informed Ram how to kill Ravana, brother. In Ravana's heart is a store of celestial nectar which renews the life in his body. The only way to kill him is to strike at his heart with a divine weapon that can dry up the nectar. So in previous discussions about this, in specifically even in Krishna Dharma's Ramayana, he draws upon a reference from Ramcharitamanas, where Tulsidas, so some of you listeners may be more familiar with Tulsidas's Ramayana or Ramcharitamanas than Valmiki's, or you may favor it because you grew up with it. The nectar was stored in Ravana's navel. That's not the way it's narrated in Valmiki Ramayana. Here's the reference from Valmiki Ramayana. That arrow, which was inviolable as a thunderbolt hurled by the arms of Indra and irresistible as Yama, the Lord of Death, fell upon Ravana's chest. That arrow, released with great speed, and which was capable of destroying the body, tore off the heart, not navel, of that evil-minded Ravana. Now, it's not, it's just a difference of authors, and, you know, I like Valmiki Ramayana, but we'll honor Tulsi's explanation as well. Because this is part of the Vibhisana narration, I'm going to read to you briefly a little section from Krishna Dharma's description of Ravana being slain. Matali. Matali is the chariot driver of Ram. He happens to be the chariot driver of Indra, and Indra loaned Matali and Indra's chariot to Ram to fight against Ravan. So fighting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, Matali turned to Ram and spoke. O Ram, the time for this one's death has come. Recall now the prayer Agastya told you. This is now going back to before they went to Panchavati. Agastya recommended they go to Panchavati. Agastya also gave an irresistible weapon. Agastya also gave you an arrow when you were in the forest. Imbue that arrow with the force of the Brahmastra and kill the demon by piercing his heart. Accepting Matali's advice, Rama remembered the celestial arrow which Agastya had given him long ago in the forest. At once it appeared in his hand, and he fitted it to his bow. Its shaft was made of ether, and its weight consisted of the Mandra and Meru mountains. The wind god presided over its shaft, the fire god over its plumes, and the sun god was installed as its point. It looked like the rod of universal destruction wielded by Time Spirit himself. Ram again chanted the Aditya Hridaya prayer and then invoked the infallible Brahmastra. As Ram drew back the arrow, he shone so brilliantly that no one could look at him. He released the weapon, and it flew at Ravana, lighting up the earth and sky, and roaring like a tumultuous ocean. It struck the demon on his chest, not his navel, even as he stood firing his own weapons at Ram. Piercing right through his heart, the arrow emerged from Ravana's body, soaked in blood, and entered the earth. Ravana whirled around and let out a cry which seemed to shake the entire creation. His bow dropped from his hands, and he fell from his chariot like a mountain struck down by Indra's thunderbolt. So that was made possible by a team effort, but Vibhisana gave the word of how it could be done. So Ravana is now dead. The demigods are showering flowers upon Ram. And interesting painting, you see one of the heads just lying there by his feet, and his sword and his broken bow and so forth. Immediately, Vibhisana comes forward and he laments because he had affection for Ravan as his brother, as his nephew. And there's nice teaching at this point by Ramachandra to Vibhisana, explaining that a warrior that is killed in battle need not be mourned. It's described, there's a place, sometimes it comes up, where did these personalities go? Because Ravan previously was whom? Ravana previously was Hiranyakashipu. And after Hiranyakashipu was killed, he went somewhere because later he became Ravana. So where's that somewhere? The somewhere, it doesn't say specifically, but that somewhere, a common understanding is there's a heavenly realm where heroes go. Vira Svarga, it's called. And staying there for some time, he again, Ravana, became Shishupal. So, and then following that position, because those killed by Ram, distinct from those killed by Krishna, this is our Bhagavatam understanding. Those killed by Krishna attain the spiritual world. Those killed by Vishnu or Vishnu incarnations are not necessarily going back to Godhead. But a warrior that's killed in battle need not be mourned. And he gives transcendental teachings about the soul. He advises Vibhisana, kneeling there before Ravana, to perform the funeral, because that's the religious duty, and Ram abides by religious principle. And so the funeral is performed. The Mandodari and various ladies are there crying, seeing. Ravana's immolation. Vibhishan on the right side is performing the funeral rites. There's another very ancient painting down at the bottom right. That's the funeral pyre. And Ram in the lower left, Ram is being honored. Vibhishan in the upper right becomes the king. There's Vibhishan becoming the king. The ceremony was performed for a second time, as was performed before going to Lanka by Lakshmana on behalf of Ram. And then the next service that Vibhishan performs is he provides the means for Ram to return to Ayodhya. Ram wants to stay in Lanka. Vibhishan wants Ram to stay in Lanka. And Ram says, I have to get back because Bharata took a vow that if I don't return in the prescribed time, he'll enter fire and give up his life. So I have to get back in a hurry. Can you make a means for me to get there? Of course, he doesn't need anything, but he's giving Vibhishan an opportunity for service. So the Pushpaka Vimana that was originally given by Brahma to Vishravana is now given to Ram, and they all happily return back to Ayodhya. Now the Pushpaka Vimana can expand because all the Vanaras got on board, and they stopped in Kishkinda, and all their wives got on board, and had a nice journey to get to Ayodhya. There's the three queens and other citizens greeting Ram as he returns, along with Vanaras. There's the coronation of Ram, in an image at least, where Agastya is performing that ceremony. There's fires and the lamps and the sages and the assembly and everything. Another very nice painting. In the upper right, you see the demigods honoring coronation of Ram. And on the lower right, you see the three queens wearing their widow saris, and Vanaras on the left side, and so forth. And his brothers by his side. And of course, Sita. So this is the Vibhishan after coronation, etc. He returns back to Lanka. We heard already at the very beginning. He was gifted the Sri Ranganath deity, and he's with his future queen, Sharama. We're going to now hear something about Vibhishan's good wife, Sharama. In the previous class, we heard that his wife was arranged by Ravana. Sharama was her name. She's the daughter of one of the great Gandharva kings, and she was virtuous like her husband from the very beginning. And in the company of her husband, he moved very, very swiftly. Now, please remember that when Vibhishan left the assembly of Ravana with his 4 ministers, he didn't even go say Haribol to his wife, like, I have to go now because things are what they are. He just left. Something very similar to what Vidura did when he was insulted and left the palace in Hastinapur. Vidura just left. There's a lot of similarity between the two personalities in a number of ways. So he left, and Sarama was back in Lanka without her husband. But she has a very important role because she was one of the main supports for Sita during that time that she was in captivity in Lanka. So we'll hear about her this way. Hanuman, the whole Vanara army crossing the bridge. There we see Ram and Lakshman riding in, it looks like a palanquin. And the Vanaras carrying the palanquin. And over there, kind of to the right side, right of the center, there's a dark-skinned person. Likely that's Vibhisana. And off they go to surround the whole city of Lanka and make their plan. And after Ravana hears the extent of the forces, he consults his ministers. Because he heard from his ministers, or spies rather, the extent of the forces. He heard from 2 sets of spies. So he's concerned. And he calls an assembly of his ministers and generals what to do. A suggestion is made that they weaken the Vanaras by weakening Sita. And the way to weaken Sita, one way is call upon the sorcerer that's in our company. And Ravana likes the idea. So he instructs Vidyujiva to create 2 things. A head that looks just like Ram's head, and a bow that looks just like Ram's bow. You hide, and once it's all set, and I'm going to go inform Sita that Ram is dead. So he does that, and Ravan likes the likeness of Ram's head. I don't know if he knows what Ram looks like, but the likeness of Ram's head and his bow. And then Ravana goes to where Sita is and inform her of the good news. Your good husband is dead. And to prove it, he has the sorcerer come forward and show the illusory head, which she recognizes. So there's Ravana on the right, there's Sita surrounded by the Rakshasis on the left, and there's Ram's head being carried for her to examine. And she sees the head, she recognizes the likeness, and she is tormented in various ways by Ravana, again and again and again. And he asks that she be killed, that the body of her husband be placed on a fire, and that she will enter that same fire because her life is with Ram. And she's tormented with grief. So this is where Sarama comes in. Ravana is called away suddenly, abruptly. Prahasta needs you immediately. So Ravana doesn't conclude this exchange with Sita. He leaves. And Sarama comes forward. And she already has a relationship with Sita. It was requested by Ravan. Sita may try to harm herself because of her very sorrowful feelings. So make sure that doesn't happen. Make nice friendship with her. And that was a service. So she had regularly gone and consoled Sita in various ways. Sarama said to Sita, I heard the whole thing. I heard what Ravan said. I saw the head. I saw the whole thing. Please understand, this is just a magic trick. Not only Ram is fully alive, but if you like, I can. He is outside with millions and millions and millions of Vanaras ready for siege upon the city of Lanka. So do not worry. And if you like, I can carry a message to Ram. because, or I can even take you there to see Ram. But Sita declines and says, what I really want to know, as Ravana has gone to make his battle plan, please, you have, privileges, go inside and find out what the plan is and let me know. She's a princess. She wants to know what the battle plan is. This is another painting I don't like so much. I like this one on the left better. This is another painting by some artist to illustrate Sarama. And here's Sarama with her thoughts of the illustrious Ram, indicating shortly Ram will be victorious. Sarama says it's not possible for anyone to kill Ram even when he's asleep. So Sita is relieved. I mean, who can imagine how horrible the scene is? But having a shelter of a caring, affectionate, pure person like Sarama helped Sita through all of this. She informed Sita, Sarama informed Sita that Ram and Lakshman stand protected by the troops gathered together at the vicinity of the ocean. Here's what says she can carry a message. And Sarama played an important role in comforting and supporting Sita through her ordeal. And at the end, we don't hear so much further about Sarama. Ravan is finally killed. And after Ravan is killed, we already heard, there's the funeral ceremony. Vibhisana becomes the king, and Sarama becomes the queen of Lanka. So there's our description of Vibhisana and Sarama. So let's see. We spent a lot of time with the previous class on the significance of Vibhisana's surrender in the whole the story of surrender, or the teachings about surrender in Ramayana. And we heard how important he was to Ramachandra. Of course, his three brothers, not just because they're brothers, but they're expansions of him. Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, respectively. But he places the regard that he has for Sugriva even above them, and places Vibhisana even above Sugriva. At least that's one of the Alvar's description. So he is very dear to Ram's heart. And the principle of surrender is also, and he's the best example, one of the best examples of the image of surrender found in Ramayana. Let's see if there's some discussion. It's a little difficult doing this because for those of you that are remote, there's two of us in the room and there's the rest of you who are out there. So for discussion, it's relying on the rest of you who are out there. So we'll give some time for you to put something in the chat box and we have some discussion.
So what I was thinking, here we are glorifying Vibhisana's service, that how he helped Lord Rama identifying maybe the weaker points. But in our language, Hindi language, we have it is called as Ghar ka bhedi Lanka dhai, which means an insider will bring the Lanka, which is used in a sense when someone near or a close or a dear one cheats you,
Yes.
then it is like you are spoiled in that sense. So that looks like a very materialistic understanding. Here we are glorifying it. Like whatever he did with Lord, so appreciate.
Well, I was unaware of that Hindi saying, but Ravana says the same thing. We read it when he was not accepting Vibhishan's advice, and he said essentially the same thing. You know, it's understood. He said it in his own way, but the same thing that you just said. And the insider is known to be the greatest detriment. Now, after the Vanaras reach Lanka, and he gets this report from his two sets of spies, how many there are and their strength, and there's still more coming, and so forth. He regrets, I didn't kill Hanuman when I had the chance. He's not blaming Vibhishan, but he's, but so a resolution to this is very simple. That which in worldly estimation may be bad, in spiritual estimation is good. The spiritual estimation is service to truth and service to the Supreme. That is, abiding by Dharma and surrendering to the Supreme. One who abides by Dharma is protected by Dharma. So supposing there's an insider that wants to abide by Dharma, and others who are part of that inside group want to abide by Adharma. The worldly explanation, there's envious people who the inside group is abiding by Dharma, but they try to mess up the inside group because of their inside information and their envy. And it's, in other words, everything becomes deteriorated when the principles of Dharma and service to the Supreme Lord are in darkness or put to the side. But the opposite is abide by Dharma and serve the Supreme Lord. And then everything becomes good. This is one of the repeated examples that Prabhupada would speak about in Bhagavad Gita. Now, it's not about insiders, outsiders, or insiders bring destruction, but it's about that which is bad, killing, is good when it's what Krishna wants. And when it's abiding by Dharma, good. In our modern times, for example, it's not about insiders, it's about Dharma. There's this abundant discussion about capital punishment. And should it not, back and forth. Just a little sharing. A few years ago, I was a teenager. And in the church that I grew up in, rather than upanayana, or bar mitzvah in the Jewish faith, there was what's called confirmation. And to preceding confirmation, it was like reaffirming baptism. So the teenagers are brought together and they discuss some topic. And I recall the topic, and I recall, the irresolution of the topic. And the topic was capital punishment. Is it to be done or not? That was the topic. And after whatever the number of weeks, 2 months or something, every Sunday afternoon or whatever it was, no resolution. I was really frustrated because nobody knew. There was nothing authoritative, and it wasn't until I became a devotee that it became clear in the laws of Manu. If someone has committed such a crime, then they're to be punished because it's good for the soul. Otherwise, the soul will, in this life, have to suffer, and the next life have to be killed anyways, for the sin of killing. So capital punishment, in principle, is to be done. But if you don't have the principle, then it's, you don't know. So then it comes this back to the Hindi saying, an insider can make havoc because they have inside information, and whether people are abiding by Dharma or not, an insider can cause difficulty. So what's to be honored in Ramayana is abiding by virtue. When you abide by virtue, that's good. That's the way to live your life. Whether you're an insider, an outsider, or somewhere in between. Abide by virtue, live by the truth, uphold the truth, and that's good. And those who consider you to be an insider say, "Oh, you're betraying us." And some were saying that about Vibhisana. But we're honoring him because he was abiding by virtue and surrendering to Ram. And that's the dividing between the Hindi saying and the Ramayana saying, the Ramayana glorification. He's honored because of his surrender and his virtue. Despite the inside nastiness, he didn't waver. When the opportunity came, when the service opportunity to uplift the inside group was no longer successful, possible, he left. So they likely criticized him. Oh, look what he's doing. He's abandoning the inside group, going against us. Then they're gonna say their Hindi saying. Okay. Anything else online? Online people, please wake up. Please speak up. Because otherwise we're going to end shortly. I'll wait a bit. Okay.
On bit about Vali and Sugriva, and we said Lord Rama said that why there were reasons that why he killed Vali, and in those reasons, one of the reason is there is no harm killing a monkey, just a monkey. Many places.
No, that's not one of them.
Where Vali says that you are not going to get anything from my skin.
Yes.
Why did you kill me? That
we're
was
gonna
one of the
cover that.
reasons.
We will cover that. He's not doing it to get something from him.
Yes.
He's doing it to uphold Dharma.
Yeah. But what I was thinking when Lord Rama said that I could not identify a difference between Vali and Sugriva was both. And
Yeah.
the main reason is given that Vali killed because he kind of stole one of Sugriva.
Not kind of.
Yeah. So sure of the word. So was living with the. So I'm thinking they are monkey. How can the rules of mankind be applied to them?
It's a little tricky. It's a little tricky because in some cases they apply, in some cases they don't apply. That's a subtle point that moved between, like, is Ram divinely knowledgeable, or is he sometimes not divinely knowledgeable? At least in Leela, is he sometimes not divinely knowledgeable? Similarly, are the Vanaras bound by human rules, or are the Vanaras not bound by human rules because they're monkeys? So it's a little different. I mean, sometimes and sometimes not. Like one of the points, you're ahead of yourself because we'll get to Vali in that discussion, and Ram's response in detail. There's like 8 or 10 different criticisms and responses. We'll see. We'll go over it. Vali considers himself an animal. what you can't. What's the use of killing an animal? You can't even use it. It's not what humans can use. You can't use monkey skins. So why are you killing me? There's nothing to gain for you. And Ram turns it around and says, just see, even you're acknowledging that you're an animal. And therefore, according to Dharma codes, a warrior or a fighter or one who's using weapons can kill an animal from behind it, from behind a bush or tree. But then on the other hand, he's violating Dharma. And it's not only another man's wife, but it's the younger brother's wife that has a special position in Vedic culture. You don't cohabit with your younger brother's wife. It's especially sinful. No, so that's a code, because Bali was criticizing Ram for violating Dharma. And Ram is responding. It's within the codes of Dharma. Because we'll hear more. I have jurisdiction. You say you didn't do anything to me in Ayodhya, but I'm the representative of the Ikshvaku dynasty. And the Ikshvaku dynasty, there was an agreement with Bharata. He'll look after the city, I'll look after the forest. I'm under the authority of the Ikshvaku dynasty, and you've done sin. It is my duty to bring accountable sin makers or violators of Dharma. And your violation of Dharma is very clear. And therefore, you're to be punished. If I don't, then I incur some portion of the reaction for your sin by not punishing you. So you're to be punished, and the punishment is death. So you're put to death. And that's a code of Dharma. But he was being criticized for violating Dharma. I'm not in violation of Dharma. So, back to your question. Is he an animal or is he human? Are the codes of Dharma applicable for humans? Or what about, is he an animal? If he's an animal, then codes of human conduct are not applicable. So it's a little fuzzy, or it wavers a bit, as far as I can see. Now, maybe somebody more scholarly in Ramayana, there are some scholarly Ramayana persons listening to these classes or recordings of these classes, and if they have something to say about this, please do so. Maybe I'll present a question to them just involuntarily, because it's going to come up when we get to Bali and Sugriva. Okay. Speak into the microphone.
Yes. Looking at the different characters, I am reflecting on, even if evil determination is too strong, there will be favorable people or circumstances to help the righteous who is aligned with Lord's service.
Yes.
Please. Or maybe she's saying it's a comment.
Yeah, it is a comment, and you said it very nicely. I don't need to say it better than you said it. You said it very nicely. Those who, the same principle from the very first class. Those who abide by Dharma are protected by Dharma. Dharma rakshata rakshataha. That's from Manu's Smriti. And those who take shelter of Ram are protected by Ram. So you have double protection by abiding by Dharma, and even you're in the midst of unfavorable circumstances or bad people or vicious people or whatever, no worries, you're protected. Okay, so we're done for this morning. Thank you all very much. In the Prabhupada Ki. Bye.